Good morning from Singapore, and a special greeting to all of you joining us online, especially those overseas. Buenas noches en Colombia, Chile, Mexico, y Peru. Welcome to the Pacific Alliance and Singapore Partners in Globalization online seminar. My name is Gerson Garduno, and it's a pleasure to be your MC for this event. Without further ado, we would like to begin this event. I would like to give a warm welcome to Madame Laura Valdivieso Jiménez, Vice Minister of Trade at the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Tourism of Colombia, to open today's session with her keynote address. Vice Minister Valdivieso, please.
Minister Alvin, distinguished ambassadors of the Pacific Alliance member countries, representatives of the academic and business sectors, and all the assistants who accompany us today, I am pleased to address such a distinguished audience. It is an honor for me to be part of this important event to highlight the commercial and partnership ties that the Pacific Alliance has been strengthening with Singapore over the last years. This 2021 marked a milestone for us. On April 30, we commemorated the 10th anniversary of the Alliance, and it is an honor to have the pro-tempore presidency during such a special year. Despite its short existence, the Pacific Alliance has already had significant progress in its founding objective to achieve greater regional integration in order to promote growth, development, and competitiveness to the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. Before addressing the accomplishments of the Pacific Alliance, I would like to highlight key aspects of the bilateral relationship between Colombia and Singapore. First, I would like to say that our commercial ties have increased significantly. In spite of the global trade disruption we received last year, which affected our mining exports to Singapore in products such as oil, ferronickel, and coal, our non-mining exports have diversified and now include products such as coffee beans, extracts, flowers, plastics, wood products, medicines, confectionery, and sweets, among others that on average have raised to $7 million annually for the past 5 years. In regards to investments, Singapore's foreign direct investment stock in Colombia reached $118 million, ranking fourth among Asian investors in our country behind Japan, China, and South Korea. For instance, the investment of PSA International stands out with a 46% participation in the port of Agua Dulce in Colombia. Likewise, in February 2021, the company TDCX, which specializes in BPO services, establishes its first office in Latin America in Bogota. In this area, we would like to continue fostering diversification of our investment ties. As a country, Colombia is committed to attract, facilitate, and retain foreign direct investment opportunities in sectors such as financial services, software, IT services, BPO, infrastructure, agro-industrial sector, among others, where we would like to welcome Singaporean companies. I would also like to stress our commitment to effectively insert ourselves in the Asia-Pacific region via our current trade negotiations with Singapore in the Pacific Alliance framework, but also to reiterate the Colombia's interest in joining the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, APEC, where we hope to have Singapore's support in this long-standing objective. Moving on to the Pacific Alliance, I would like to highlight the importance of the Pacific Alliance in global markets. As you may know, it has a combined population of 230 million, a per capita GDP of $19,000, and exports that reach $627 billion, making the alliance the eighth largest exporter in the world. Moreover, these figures have also positioned us as the eighth largest economy, attracting 56 million tourists, representing 41% of the Latin America and Caribbean GDP, and accounting for 38% of its foreign direct investment. Additionally, both the World Competitiveness Center and Doing Business rank our countries as the most competitive in the region. In terms of achievements of the first decade of the Pacific Alliance, I would like to highlight some concrete results and efforts. First, regarding trade facilitation, the Alliance not only achieved the interoperability of the foreign trade single window, but also the Alliance was the first bloc in the region to have a mutual recognition agreement regarding authorized economic operators. In terms of promoting trades in goods, services, and tourism, over the past decade, we've held 8 matchmaking business forums, 8 entrepreneurship and innovation forums, 6 tourism business forums, and the participation of more than 4,600 companies and generating close to $1 billion in business opportunities. On the other hand, the creation and strengthening of the Business Council is one of our main achievements, bringing entrepreneurs closer through a permanent dialogue mechanism between governments and the private sector. Moreover, aligned with the objective of promoting free movement of people, the Alliance worked on the elimination of tourism and entrepreneurs visas. These achievements have positioned the Alliance as the most robust and ambitious integration process in the region, managing to capture the world's attention. In fact, today we have 59 observer states from all continents, as well as Singapore, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, followed by South Korea and Ecuador as candidates to become associated states. On the other hand, our main challenge has been to maintain a Pacific Alliance as an advanced, deep, modern integration initiative. That's why we outline a path through the 2030 strategic vision that we are developing right now. In the current circumstances, this challenge acquires more relevance. 1.5 years after the declaration of the global pandemic, it is imperative to strengthen the founding principles with a new impulse that ensures the well-being of our citizens with tangible benefits. In this context, Colombia, in its pro-tempore presidency working plan, has chosen to face this challenge by reaffirming the strategic vision 2030 that in commercial aspects highlights the importance of a more integrated, more global, and more connected Pacific Alliance. In the more integrated axis, we seek to increase intra-alliance trade through the identification of productive regional chains to reach third markets. This area is crucial in the current scenario of the disruption of global value chains. We're also working on regulatory harmonization to facilitate trade in strategic sectors. Hence, we're moving forward the negotiation and implementation of regulatory measures for medical devices, food supplements, and household and personal care products. The first axis is complemented by the objective of a more connected mechanism that offers new opportunities, where SMEs will play a fundamental role. In this area, the Alliance will configure its regional digital market with an emphasis on 3 pillars: improving access to the digital market, creating an enabling environment to promote the exchange of goods and services through digital means, and developing a digital economy that promotes growth, productivity, and employment. Finally, in order to make the Pacific Alliance more global, we aim to strengthen its leadership on the international scenario through our external relations, including current negotiation processes and a closer relationship with different economic and cooperation mechanisms in Asia, such as the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations. Now, besides the mentioned pillars, as part of our internationalization policy as an approximation strategy to the Asia-Pacific region, the Pacific Alliance is negotiating with Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Singapore as candidates for associated states. In particular, the Pacific Alliance members share with Singapore the idea that growth driven by productivity and innovation is the best way to ensure long-term sustainable economic development. In this sense, we are sure that the trade agreement will boost our commercial and economic relationship. Under the pro-tempore presidency that Colombia exercises, progress has been made, and we are very proud to say that negotiations with Singapore are expected to be concluded soon. We're eager to continue fostering our relationship with Singapore, which is why we perceive being an associated state not only that promotes a free trade agreement, but also provides windows of opportunities in cooperation areas. As a final word, I would like to reinforce that these pillars presented today are the core of the legacy that Colombia wants to leave to the Pacific Alliance in its pro-tempore presidency, mainly to provide tools to achieve the economic reactivation so necessary in the current circumstances. We are convinced that these actions lay the path for the years to come, and will help to solidify the status of the Pacific Alliance as a global reference on integration. I would like to thank for making this event possible and to express once again the Pacific Alliance commitment to continue working to build a stronger relationship with Singapore. Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Minister Laura Valdivieso, for the excellent remarks. And next, I would like to invite Mr. Alvin Tan, Minister of State at the Ministry of Trade and Industry and Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth of Singapore, to join us live for his keynote address. Minister Tan, please.
Ms. Laura Valdivieso Jiménez, Vice Minister of Trade for Colombia, Ambassadors of the Pacific Alliance to Singapore, Mr. Ignacio Concha, Ambassador of Chile, Mr. Manuel Solano, Ambassador of Colombia, Mr. Agustin Garcia Lopez, Ambassador of Mexico, and Mr. Carlos Vasquez, Ambassador of Peru. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure today to address you at the opening of the inaugural seminar of the Pacific Alliance Singapore Seminar Series. And this seminar was first conceived over a lunch that I had with the 4 Pacific Alliance ambassadors in Singapore just in April this year. At the lunch, we discussed how such an event would be a meaningful initiative in our shared efforts to enhance awareness and links amongst our countries. I'm glad to see that this idea has come to fruition today. It was indeed a very productive lunch. I'm also heartened by the good attendance at the seminar because it shows a wide-ranging interest and reinforces our desire to be more connected. I would like to begin by congratulating the Pacific Alliance on your 10th anniversary this year. At a time where protectionist and anti-globalization sentiments are challenging the global economy, the Pacific Alliance remains a champion for open and free trade. As a progressive group, the Pacific Alliance has made remarkable achievements over the last decade. These include eliminating 92% of all tariffs among the 4 member states and continuing to liberalize your services and investment markets. 2, facilitating the flow of people and talent across borders by removing short-term and business visa requirements. And 3, establishing an integrated stock exchange known as the Mercado Integrado Latinoamericano, or MILA, which has become one of the largest stock exchanges in Latin America. Today, the Pacific Alliance has a combined GDP of US $2.1 trillion. This is akin to other regional trade groupings, for example, like ASEAN, where the GDP for the ASEAN grouping, for instance, stands at approximately US $2.8 trillion. Now, the Pacific Alliance is the world's 8th largest economy, accounting for 52% of Latin America and the Caribbean's total trade, and attracting 45% of investments that flow into the region. And Singapore is happy and delighted to be working with the Pacific Alliance to deepen trade and economic links between our countries as nodes of our respective regions. We are, in effect, the connecting tissue between both these regions. And most people think of Latin America and Asia as 2 regions separated by vast physical distance with language, cultural, and historical differences. However, we are more connected than we imagine. Trade and commerce links between Latin America and Asia were established as early as the 16th century. Early European explorations of the Pacific, and most notably of the Magellan Route, initiated connections between the South American continent and Asia. The Manila Galleon was the first shipping service between the Philippines and Mexico, and this catalyzed more frequent interactions between both regions. And these galleons that sailed between our regions served as vessels of trade and channels that facilitated the exchange of ideas, culture, and peoples. This period is commonly referred to as one of the earliest examples of globalization. It is thus fitting that today's seminar is titled Pacific Alliance and Singapore, Partners in Globalization. It encapsulates both sides' desires to refresh these links and grow our partnership. Over the years, our business links have strengthened. Companies are increasingly aware of the opportunities in both regions, and growth in total trade flows between the Pacific Alliance and ASEAN bear testament to this, reaching US $42.7 billion in 2019. This is almost double from 10 years ago. And between Singapore and the Pacific Alliance, our bilateral trade has grown almost 50% since 2010. Singapore companies, such as C Group and PSA, has invested in various markets in the Pacific Alliance in a diverse range of sectors. Other companies, such as Diijia Food Manufacturing and Grupo KB, have also exported their products to Latin America using the Pacific Alliance as a base. And I'm confident that more such companies will follow, and we will do our part to encourage this. Likewise, we welcome more companies from the Pacific Alliance to follow the footsteps of companies such as Concha y Toro and Latin Leap to use Singapore as a launchpad to leap, actually, and to uncover business opportunities in Southeast Asia and beyond. So there's so much potential for us to increase our trade and investment between both our regions. And Singapore sees the potential for growth in the digital technology and agri-trade sectors, which would strengthen our supply chain resilience as we enrich new markets with our goods and our services. This would not only benefit our companies, but more importantly, bring to fruition the benefits of globalization. This includes building resilient supply chains, as I mentioned earlier, creating more job opportunities for our people, and supporting good jobs, improving the lives of the people in both our regions. Now, galleons of the past braved treacherous seas to cross the Pacific and did not allow waves and challenging tides to stop their pursuit of better economic prospects. Similarly, we hope that companies in both our regions will rise against any of these tides with the same spirit of adventure and take on exciting and meaningful opportunities that both our regions have to offer. The global economy is now at a crossroads. Notwithstanding the pressures from protectionism and uncertainties arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, Singapore and the Pacific Alliance have chosen to persevere with greater economic integration instead of going down the path of protectionism. At the Pacific Alliance Summit in December last year, our leaders announced the substantial conclusion of the free trade agreement between the Pacific Alliance and Singapore. Further to this, I'm pleased to share that our chief negotiators are preparing the agreement for signature by the end of this year. I would like to commend the hard work of our negotiators who have persevered through 4 years and the COVID-19 crisis to complete the FTA. They have every reason to be proud of the fruits of their labor, and I know that they've been meeting almost every single week, working hard at this. This FTA gives businesses the assurance that their investments will be supported by a robust trade architecture. It is also our first FTA with Colombia, and this agreement enables businesses to access opportunities in our respective markets and foster greater cooperation in areas such as e-commerce, customs, trade facilitation, and maritime services. These would help to expedite trade flows between both our regions. Most importantly, this FTA sends a powerful message to our global community that our countries remain open for business, and despite the pressures placed on economic multilateralism, we want to reach out to one another and create more opportunities for our people. Once the FTA is signed, Singapore, I'm very proud to say, will be the first associate state of the Pacific Alliance. This is an honor. We are excited to be part of this platform that will catalyze closer people-to-people ties and further economic cooperation between us. This is an opportunity to do so in areas of mutual interest, such as infrastructure, digital and innovation, energy, and trade, food trade. And so I look forward to our next chapter of collaboration. I'm sure all of us here can agree that Singapore and the Pacific Alliance have come a long way to deepen our friendship and our cooperation. But we want to build on this foundation, grow our links even more, and generate opportunities for our people and our businesses. So I would like to thank again my friends, the ambassadors of the Pacific Alliance countries in Singapore, who have worked so hard to grow our relationship, and they've been persevering at this non-stop with us. I'm certain that the alliance between our countries will remain strong for a long time to come. So muchos gracias to our partner in globalization, and I wish everyone a fruitful session ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Alvin Tan, for extraordinary remarks. And next, joining us online from Peru, Ms. Sayuri Bayona, former Vice Minister of Trade of Peru and an expert FTA negotiator, is here to share her views on the Pacific Alliance-Asia relations. Madame Bayona, please.
Good evening. His Excellency Minister Alvin Tan, Minister of Trade and Industry of Singapore, Ms. Laura Valdivieso, Vice Minister of Trade from Colombia, all our ambassadors from the Pacific Alliance member countries, distinguished guests, and of course, my fellow panelists this evening. It's of course the evening here in Peru and morning in Singapore, and it is a pleasure for me to be able to join you through these virtual means to participate in this, this seminar. So I would like to tell you a bit more about the Pacific Alliance this morning. I have a PowerPoint presentation that, can I just check if it's being, there it is, okay, that it's being projected. So can we go to the first slide, please? As the minister has already told us, the Pacific Alliance is a very significant initiative that is currently going on in Latin America. The Pacific Alliance has just turned 10 years old, and it is a very significant process in Latin America. As you may know, there are a number of integration efforts in this region. We have, for example, Mercosur, we have ALADI, we have the Andean Community, and other initiatives that are very important in our region. However, the Pacific Alliance has gained a lot of interest worldwide, actually, because of the dynamics that it has shown throughout these years. It is very significant because these are 4 like-minded countries with open trade and investment policies, and they have an explicit goal of enhancing integration, particularly with the Asian continent. The 4 member countries that are Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru are all very highly integrated into the world through extensive networks of trade agreements, and they all share a very pragmatic approach to trade. So in the case of Chile, for example, they have 30 free trade agreements. In the case of Mexico and Peru, we have 20 free trade agreements across the world each. In the case of Colombia, they also have 16 free trade agreements. And all these 4 countries have developed these networks throughout the last 20 to 30 years of showing very stable open trade policies. Throughout the PA's existence, the member countries have made significant efforts in order to harmonize their regulatory frameworks, to facilitate trade, and to develop origin regulations to promote the region's integration to global value chains. So this is very important because we are not only seeking our own integration into the world through our FTAs, but seeking to develop this further integration as a bloc in order to be able to join these global value chains. As you know, the Latin American region has not been as strong as it should be in order to ride this wave. So it is one of the Pacific Alliance's most important objectives to do so. The next slide. Now, the Pacific Alliance is also quite relevant in its numbers, as you can see in this slide. The 4 member countries are jointly the 8th economic power in the world and the 8th export force as well. As you can see, there is a population of over 200 million people in this region, with a per capita GDP of around $19,000 per year. Now, this is, like I mentioned, a very dynamic region in the sense that we have these 4 countries represent 38% of Latin American and the Caribbean GDP. And like I mentioned as well, very open in terms of trade and with exports amounting to $627 billion. These are the numbers pre-COVID, but as you know, these numbers are rapidly recovering as well. Also, the stability, the macroeconomic stability that these countries have shown make it the destination of 45% of foreign direct investment that the region receives. Next slide, please. So in its 10 years, the Pacific Alliance has attracted a lot of attention from the world. We currently have 59 observer states of the Alliance. This is very important. These are members, I mean, these are countries from around the world, 28 of them from the European continent, but covering a number of countries from the Asian continent as well. And the Pacific Alliance has developed work programs with many different groups, particularly with ASEAN, with the EU, with OECD, and with the Eurasian Economic Commission. So the work that we are carrying out, for example, with Singapore, has also had this backdrop over the past few years. And more recently, the Pacific Alliance has initiated the negotiations and carried out the negotiations with associate states, with candidates to be associate states. The 4 initial negotiations have been carried out with Australia, with Canada, New Zealand, and Singapore. And as Minister Tan has mentioned, the work carried out with Singapore has been very successful, and like he mentioned, hopefully the FTA will be signed very soon. The other 2 candidates to associate states are Ecuador and Korea, and these are countries that will be the first to have a free trade agreement with the Pacific Alliance as a group. Next, please. Now, there have been many significant achievements in the Pacific Alliance. I would like to highlight some of the main achievements. And the first of them is the free trade agreement called the Additional Protocol to the Pacific Alliance, which has eliminated tariffs for 92% of the tariff universe upon its entry into force. And this means that almost 100% of tariffs will be eliminated by 2030. The second achievement that I would like to mention is the establishment of the 2030 strategic vision to achieve a more integrated, more global, more connected, and more citizen-oriented alliance. This has been a very important program, a work program carried out by the Pacific Alliance countries, because it shows that there is, a political will to carry out long-term planning for the alliance in order to make sure that its expansion continues over the years with a very open view of covering a number of different subjects to be worked on by the countries. We have also carried out more than 180 export, investment, and tourism promotion activities among the countries, generating close to $1 billion in business opportunities. This has been something that that has been very particular to the alliance, because usually countries carry out their own activities in order to promote their exports, their investment, and such. But in this case, this shows the true view that these countries have in order to promote themselves as a bloc. Now, another very significant achievement has been the interoperability of the trade single windows of the countries for SPS and origin certificates, which save time and money and facilitate business development. So these are digital tools that make trade much easier by exchanging these certificates, which previously had to be exchanged in physical means. And this makes everything easier for our trade operators. Another achievement has been the elimination of short-term tourist and business visas between PA countries, which was an issue that, was a sort of obstacle that we had before that has been eliminated in order to facilitate business among our countries. Also, I would like to highlight the declaration on the sustainable management of plastics and its roadmap for implementation. This has been a very special initiative in order to directly tackle the issue of plastic use in the region, and is also somewhat of an example for other countries in the region in order to address this very important issue with specific steps in order to implement it over the coming years. And finally, the Pacific Alliance has been able to develop an ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation with networks of accelerator agencies, innovation, and technology transfer. Next, please. Now, what are some of the challenges for the Pacific Alliance over the next few years? Firstly, I would like to highlight the need for an increased intra-Pacific Alliance trade. Currently, while these countries are all very open to trade and investment, and while they have diversified significantly their export destinations and import suppliers, this has been done mainly through trade with the European bloc, with North America, with Asian countries, and there has been, very strong dynamics to that. But the trade within the bloc still remains quite low. So on average, trade between Pacific Alliance countries is below 10% of their total trade. And we believe that increasing this trade will make the region stronger, will make it more integrated, and will help us to be able to better make use of all the opportunities that we have through trade for this region. This is also important because trade within the group is also has a greater number of products, of value-added products, which is something that is a challenge to Latin American countries in general. So in the case of Peru, for example, we are very strong food exporters to Europe, to Asia in particular. But within the Pacific Alliance and within the Latin American region, we do have a greater value-added percentage in our trade. So I think that is something that is very important to highlight to create more employment and technology transfer within the region. Secondly, the PA has to consolidate its work. It's currently doing so. The dynamics that have followed the creation of the Pacific Alliance have been very strong over the years. Like I mentioned, the Pacific Alliance has gained a lot of attention worldwide. So while there has been a lot of effort, a lot of enthusiasm in order to promote the growth of the PA, a lot of work has to be done to structure all of the work that has to be carried out within this block. So that is something that is already being worked on, like I mentioned, through the strategic vision towards 2030, and is something that the bloc needs to continue to develop. Thirdly, there should be enhanced interaction with observer countries. Like I mentioned, there's 59 observer countries, all of them very interested in the Pacific Alliance and the dynamics of this bloc. So there are many opportunities to work with these countries, not only through the cooperation efforts that are currently being carried out, but through more extensive work in the following years. Fourthly, well, of course, concluding the negotiations with the associate states, like Minister Tan mentioned, and I also mentioned earlier, we have had very good work with Singapore, and Singapore as the first associate state, I think, will be able to make great use of these integration efforts. I think it's also very important for the Pacific Alliance to facilitate recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. So in the world, trade was severely affected last year with a drop of over 5% in trade. It was actually expected to be higher initially, but fortunately, there was a strong recovery in the second semester of the year. But in the case of Latin America, there was a very significant drop in trade. This was 12% year on year. So there are many challenges for the Latin American region to recover. And in general, trade is very important and seen as a step, as an important element in order to bring about economic recovery in these countries. So throughout the COVID crisis, the Pacific Alliance countries have been working very closely in order to minimize the impacts in the region, in order to digitalize everything that has been possible to facilitate trade in whatever means that were available to the countries. And now the challenge is to continue with the promotion of the products products and services, goods and services. But not only that, there has to be a wide view about the competitiveness that the countries need to have and that the bloc needs to have jointly in order to recover from this situation. And finally, there is a more long-term challenge or medium-term challenge of the bloc to promote increased participation in global value chains and also riding the wave of the fourth industrial revolution. This is something that is very important because, as you may know, the Latin American region has not or does not have such a significant participation in global value chains as it should. And in order to do so, it needs to have to continue to strengthen its infrastructure, its digital tools, and other trade facilitating measures as well, in order to make sure that these value chains and that the fourth industrial revolution are actually not a challenge anymore, but more of an opportunity in order to continue to grow and to grow in trade as well. And next, please. So finally, why should the Pacific Alliance be of interest to Singapore? Like I mentioned before, Singapore is set to be the first associate state of the Pacific Alliance. This is a very relevant moment because it will help to develop trade relations and integration with the region. Like I mentioned, the Pacific Alliance countries are some of the most dynamic in Latin America. And it will, the free trade agreement is a very comprehensive agreement that will generate the opportunities for expanding trade, but not only trade, but services, investment, and other opportunities. The second point that I think is of interest to Singapore is the potential for trade and investment in different sectors, such as agriculture, infrastructure, logistics, the digital economy, and the benefits of integration into global value chains, as I mentioned before. And finally, the importance of diversifying destinations and suppliers, particularly regarding food security and disruptions in global supply chains, and of course, the advancement of Singapore's own policy objectives. Here, I would like to highlight the issue of some of the things that the pandemic have shown us, and that is the need for resilience in our supply chains. I think that this is a challenge that all countries face. I think this is particularly important for Singapore, in particular with regards to food security. So the Pacific Alliance countries are important food suppliers, and it's very important for a country like Singapore to have diversified suppliers of these products. And in this case in particular, it is always important to advance in SPS regulations, SPS measures in general, in order to be able to access the Singaporean market quickly and at very competitive prices as well. And not only that, not only to, for example, to be able to feed the Singaporean population, but also as part of global value chains in the food sector, where Singapore has a lot of potential to process a number of products and also use its wonderful location and logistics in order to develop this sector even more. So I think that these are the most important issues that Singapore should take into account as the free trade agreement with the Pacific Alliance comes into force. I think it's very important for Singaporean actors in general, for enterprises, for business people, to be able to look at this region, which is very dynamic, which is quickly recovering from the effects of the pandemic on trade. And there will be several opportunities, I think, for them to work closely together. So thank you very much for your attention. And thank you once again to the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sayuri Bayona, for your insights. And next, I would like to invite Professor Simon Tay, Associate Professor of Law at National University of Singapore, NUS, editor of the Asian Journal of International Law, and chairman of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, to share his views on the Pacific Alliance-Asia relations. Professor Simon, please.
Well, good morning, good evening. First, let me join my minister in congratulating the Pacific Alliance on its anniversary. I am delighted to be here because I believe in a world of free trade and integration. It's critical that despite the pandemic facing both of our countries, all our countries, that this continue. The second reason I'm delighted to be here is that oftentimes Singapore, my small country, has played a role as a pathfinder for the region and in Asia's approach to global trade. We've done this with many trade partners, and we hope that this relationship with Pacific Alliance will lead on to more hub-to-hub, node-to-node connections that will help both sides of the Pacific. And the third reason I'm honored to be here is partly personal. When I was 30, frente años posada, I traveled to South America, Latin America for a year, and it made a profound difference in my life. Additionally, in the years since then, in terms of my work in international affairs and trade policy, it's been my pleasure to visit all the 4 Pacific Alliance member countries. And really, I believe there is a real opportunity and a real need for us, but also the global system, to find ways to work together. Let me differ, though, from my previous speakers, the ministers and Director General Sayuri, to really give more of a context rather than a text. And the context I will try to elucidate is where we are in terms of the global economy, and here the Asian perspective, some of the concerns we have about globalization, and a path forward. I think that while our regions are physically removed from each other, it's critical that we find ways of partnering, so that we really are able to work more closely together. And this will be important as we go forward. I will talk about the global order and its discontents at this point in time. I will then talk about the stresses, particularly in this pandemic. Here in Asia, and particularly for Singapore, we've nevertheless proceeded with two major trade and economic integration efforts, and I'll talk a little bit about that before we talk about new issues, because it's much more than trade today. And finally, I'll give some thoughts, in addition to what other people have said, about how Singapore can work with the Pacific Alliance. Oops. My fingers are too fast. Oh. Okay. So on the screen right now, you can see not my face, but those are two very much more important men, President Xi of China and Donald Trump. Not our president, our leaders, but to me, this sets a very important context for the text of the Pacific Alliance, as well as the text of the Pacific Alliance FTA with Singapore. We are not flowing with the tide. We have seen a rapid shift in the currents that move against what we're trying to do, to reach out to the other part of the world and find ways to win-win and cooperate together. This tide of anti-globalization should not be blamed, however, on the former President Trump or on China. This has been brewing for some time. We can see this when we look back at the history of the world trade post-Cold War. And in a small way, in 1999, when I was in Seattle, I bumped into it. At that meeting of the World Trade Organization ministers, we were meant to go forward with a new round of trade liberalization and integration. Instead, something called the Battle of Seattle happened. Protests against the WTO, against America's role, filled the streets, leading to a real conflict between the police and security forces with the citizens who had gathered, the NGOs and others. At that time, it was a minority, mainly environmental groups, labor. That has grown. Today, this sense of anti-globalization is not only in the streets, but often in the corridors of governments, the corridors of our homes. We feel somehow insecure because of globalization, rather than the initial promise that we would be more secure, that we would all benefit. It behooves all of us who believe in a more integrated world to renew that discussion, to find new ways to persuade our citizens, our family, our companies, that doing business with the rest of the world is critical. Engaging on a human level is critical. But we have to understand, as I said, we are against that tide of events. In addition to the sense of anti-globalization, the rise of China has shifted things. We have seen in that same meeting, 1999, China had substantially finished its negotiations with the WTO, was becoming a WTO member, which formally took a few more years. In this period, it was America that brought in China. I mean, everyone had to sign on to it. But without Americans' tutelage, mentoring China as part of the global system, this would not have happened then or so easily. And the decades would have been very different. So what we see today is really against the tide we saw earlier. The America first mentality, the willingness of Americans to break rules, to change what we expect of the WTO and of that long-term commitment America has to a freer world and globalization. The United States of America's change of position is affecting all of us. And the pandemic, in some senses, has really tested this and found many of the times for us to be short of what is essential and perfect. We find that in this period, we have really struggled to deal with the pandemic and keep and honor our trade commitments. There were, at the initial phase, countries that seized goods against the rules. And we have now begun to think of our interdependence as a source of insecurity, rather than becoming more secure because one can trade and receive goods from across the world. And this challenge is really something that we will struggle with unless we are able to reform the WTO and our attitudes to it. Now, I say this with some guardedness because we are not through the pandemic. It is a factor that's ongoing, not just for the health issue, but the economy and our sense of hope and growth for the future. It is possible that we will come out of the pandemic not more integrated, not better, but more narrow, more guarded, and poorer for it. I think that in this sense, we in Asia have in the last few years tried to find alternatives. This I want to share particularly those not from Asia, not from Singapore. We have felt this pressure on the world trade rules-based system that we rely on. And we've asked ourselves, what can others do when America and China are at loggerheads? I mean, these two are the great powers of the day. The USA is still the world's largest economy, and between the USA and China, there is perhaps 30-something, 40% of GDP, depending on how you count. But the question is, what can the rest of us do that form the 60 to 70% of the global economy? Now, there are various moving parts here in Asia. One, around Singapore, the 10 small and medium-sized economies of ASEAN have really tried to cohere. In the midst of this pandemic, the ASEAN leadership has tried to deal not only with the health issue, but to put forward a comprehensive recovery plan, which is to re-emphasize economic integration to get in tandem with the recovery from the pandemic. We want to grow not only stronger, not only better, but closer together arising out of this. But ASEAN is an ongoing work which sometimes people don't hear enough about. Where we have heard, and there are important steps forward, is the comprehensive, progressive, trans-Pacific partnership of which most of the Pacific Alliance are members. The CPTPP was actually the USA's initiative to engage across the Pacific, both North and South America, and our part of the world in Asia. It was very symbolic that one of the first actions that Donald Trump took coming to become president was to renege on that promise that the Obama administration had worked on so much for so many years. This removal did not mean the end of that. Japan substituted and brought the CPTPP to a conclusion. The other thing that has continued despite the move of the tide against us is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. This is led by ASEAN, that group I talked about, but includes countries far bigger than ASEAN, including China and originally India. India in the end pulled out, but nevertheless, with China, with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, ASEAN has brought together the agreement for the world's largest market. And in particular, this helped not only ASEAN, but the Northeast Asian economies. Rules of origin, harmonization of standards, these have happened already and will be part of the rollout for RCEP. So despite that global context I talked about, here in Singapore, here in Asia, we are trying to move ahead with this world of integration for mutual benefit. And I mentioned RCEP and CTPP because they still depend on that major power influence. The TPP was started by America and brought to the finish line by Japan, its ally. RCEP was led by ASEAN, but has China in it. So to come back to that question, what can we do, the rest of us, when the major powers are on the sidelines or in fact they are fighting? And this is one of the challenges that Singapore's FTA with the Pacific Alliance brings into focus. Beyond that effort, there is another effort of taking the issues beyond trade. Now, trade is important. It's still the lifeblood of what connects us. But there are new aspects of trade. We know that tariffs are the first thing that must go. But beyond that, many non-tariff measures, especially in this time of fear of contamination, of health concerns, these standards must be aligned so that wittingly or unwittingly, they do not become obstacles. And on the positive side, we must use single window, e-documentation to make the facilitation of trade as easy as possible. And one thing that excited me about the Pacific Alliance, a bit like APEC, is the effort to create an ecosystem around the agreement so that businesses are socialized into the benefits, feel more comfortable to utilize the benefits and to deal with each other despite the distance. So the world of trade is no longer about tariffs. There are many more issues that must be dealt with. And I'm really glad that the Pacific Alliance has been so progressive in many of these issues. That progress relates, however, not only to trade issues. There's new types of trade, digital economy. Here at ASEAN, we're working things out how to try to make this 600 million market more seamless for the digital economy. Here in Singapore, we have voiced an idea called virtual unlimited. In the real economy, we still want to be a global node and Asia hub. But in the virtual world, we feel that with the technology and the physical logistics, we can play a real role to reach out to the whole world and help the world connect to each other. And despite the various lockdowns and restrictions, our effort to remain that open, connected node is continuing. One other dimension of the new issues is sensitive. As we start to realize that trade matters not only to trade officials, but to our citizens, to our jobs, to our children, we have to make arguments about how trade is making things better on other dimensions. The environment is one. Remember what I said about Seattle, the workers, the labor unions, and the environmentalists in the streets. Without encouraging their protests and violence, we have to find ways to rationally convince them that the environment is protected. In fact, it can be enhanced. Otherwise, issues like deforestation and the big issue of controlling carbon become new obstacles to freer trade if we do not believe that trade is fair, not only on financial and economic terms, but in these new dimensions of concern. The same is true of labor rights. In many times, the Asian approach is that these are political issues to be left to one side. We must find ways to integrate them with the business and economic and trade issues. And I'm delighted, therefore, that the Pacific Alliance has pioneered some of the steps here. In the Pacific Alliance agreements, another issue, very important to all of us, gender is also put forward. And here, Singapore has generally not, because other Asians have not asked, other trade partners have not asked. But I believe that there can be room to work together to progress this issue. And certainly, my women ministers believe that. Let me move to my conclusion, why it matters to Singapore. I think the speakers before me have made a very strong case that trade matters to both sides of the alliance. In looking at the trade itself, business opportunities, and these new issues, I think that there really is a need to widen and re-energize the Asia-Pacific and our commitment to globalization. Singapore has been a pathfinder, is still a pathfinder despite the pandemic. We were created as a hub and continue to see our future as helping connect the world. We are therefore very interested in all partners across the world. Some are traditional partners, some are major powers, but there is every need to ask ourselves how to find new ways of working with people physically further, big but yet not major powers. We will not see, I hope, an end to globalization, but we will need to rewire the connections of globalization to push against the waves, against the tide of current events. But Singapore and our friends, and I hope we can consider the Pacific Alliance countries our friends, will be amongst us working together to build this better, closer world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Simon Tay, for an insightful presentation. And now, to round up these views of the Pacific Alliance-Asia relations, I would like to invite Mr. José Luis Parra, Executive Director of the Strategic Observatory of the Pacific Alliance. Mr. Parra, please.
Thank you. Good evening or good morning, depending on which part of the world you are watching the broadcast from. First of all, I would like to start by greeting by Minister Mr. Tan and by Vice Minister Mrs. Valdivieso, and also all authorities, ambassadors, and special guests, and all those watching that accompany us today. Secondly, I would like to say how much of an honor it is for me to be here and to join this panel with such distinguished speakers. I would like to extend my appreciation to National University of Singapore and also to the Ambassador of Chile in Singapore, Mr. Ignacio Concha, for inviting the Strategic Observatory of the Pacific Alliance to participate. We are comprised of the network for researchers from prestigious universities in 4 countries, including the Catholic University in Chile, where we have our offices. Please, the first slide. Thank you. The next one. The starting point of the Pacific Alliance. The scenario in 2011 was very beneficial to promote deep integration in the region. After many failed attempts in the region, there are 6 major points for discussions regarding the 2011 panorama. Next, please. There are 6 points and I would like to discuss with you. First, pro-free market environment. There was a pro-FTA signature atmosphere in the region and the world. There was a high expectation for the start of TPP negotiations in 2008 in Asia. Second, deep regional integration. The PA was born in response to need to generate deep integration to face the 2008 financial crisis that significantly affected the industrialized economies of the world. Number 3, promote the same values. The members of the PA share similar values in terms of the market and hope to boost intra-PA and extra-PA trade with focus in Asia. Number 4, high GDP growth and international trade. In 2011, after fall in GDP, in 2009, the members of the PA grew at rates of 5.5% and international trade at rates of 25%, well over the average for developed countries. Number 5, high commodities price. Commodity price went through the roof, generating significant income for the economies of the region. And last, the number 6, country parliaments approved FTAs and the other cooperation instruments between countries with high approval rates and very few rejections. The next one, please. 10 years later, panorama in 2021 and the global scenarios has changed radically, as well as the local situation in each country. However, the interest of the government to maintain and promote the PA has been maintained regardless of changes in the governments. For the panorama of 2021, we also find 6 main points. The next one, please. COVID-19 pandemic, one of the largest health crises of the last 100 years that has paralyzed much of the world's economy in 2020. In the second, negative impact in different sectors. The pandemic has affected many sectors of the economy, especially those that demand face-to-face presence and have less digitalization in their processes, in particular, SMEs. And number 3, election in 3 PA member states. In May 2021 and 2022, there will be an election in 3 PA countries where there could be divergent extensions of FTAs. Number 4, trade war. Trade shocks fueled by unilateral tariffs between the US and China have undone 3 to 5 years worth of growth among global value chains in affected countries, according to UN policy brief. The trade war restrictive trade policies during the COVID-19 pandemic have also amplified shocks and producing countries restricting exports. The supply troubles come as at the cost of shipping goods across the globe is skyrocketing, a menace to boost consumer price and compounding concerns in global markets already bracing for accelerating inflation. Number 5, the report for the United Nations Development Program looking at the post-pandemic future of the global value chains found that trade with those supply lines decreased in absolute terms along with the other types of trade. And the last, number 6, the effect of the trade war together with the perception regarding the free market in the region have caused a change in the outlook of the politicians towards free markets. Thus, I mentioned it before, Professor. Move for the next, please. Well, I would like to present some figures before commenting on the opportunity of PA and Singapore as associate members. I will now show you some numbers. Next, please. Intra-blocks and regions trade. Intra-blocks and regional trade, as you can see, there is low intra-PA integration, considering that it's very recent block. This situation presented an opportunity for growth in the following years with the promotion of the regional value chains, where Singapore can contribute a lot. In the PA's 2030 strategic vision, there is a goal for reaching approximately 10% intra-trade. The next one, please. International trade and percentage of GDP. In terms of the international trade, as share as of GDP, you can see that Mexico and Chile have high dependence on trade, as well as high rate of export as part of their GDP, 39% for Mexico and 28% for Chile. In terms of the number of trade agreements, Chile is the leader of the members and one of the most open economy in the world with 29 FTAs. The rest of the members have similar numbers of close to 15 or 14 FTAs. And there are more cooperation agreements in these countries. Next one, please. Amount of exporting companies and goods services. Other important figures, as you can see, consist of the numbers of exporting companies per country, as well as the number of products and services exported by members of the PA. In general terms, there is very low export metrics and few exporting companies. This represented a tremendous opportunity for the PA to diversify in export and import and increase the number of exporting companies. The PA members are making efforts along these lines. The next, please. Imports and the value of imports PA members. As you from the next four graphics, the imports of the PA countries 2 times in 2017 and 2020 were highly concentrated from certain countries. About 65% is concentrated in 5 to 6 countries, except Mexico, which is part of the global value chains, has been growing its import metrics. This provides another opportunity to increase trade with Asia. A positive case is that Colombia, which has significantly increased import from Mexico, becoming its third trading partner. Peru has also grown in its relationship with Mexico. The next, please. As you can see, Mexico and Peru, and thus I mentioned it, the numbers. The next, please. Changing the subject, here is M&A index in the PA countries. The Deloitte Chile and the PA's strategic observatory put together, which publishes the result in the media every 4 months, an analysis of the PA's 10 years M&A series found that closed $160 trillion has invested, with approximately 2,000 transactions. In 2017, presenting the lower results in terms of millions of dollars invested, and in 2020, there is the lowest numbers of transactions. The next, please. Continuously in terms to the merger and acquisition, regarding the most important sectors in investment, amounts are energy and resources with 17.6 billion. And the second place, consumer industry with 28.2 billion. And the third place, financial services with 21 billion, and in infrastructure with 18 billion. Regarding, on the second graphic, regarding the numbers of operation, consumer industry is a first place with 628 operation. And a second place, energy and resources with 606. In a third place, telecom and media with 275 operation. The next one. Why PA is attractive for Singapore and PA to Singapore? The next one. PA is attractive to Singapore, and here some point to think about. First is an entry point to Latin markets, as I mentioned it before. Second, market size is 220 million around of population. And the third, harmonized standard. And the number four, rules of origin and origin procedures, thus is similar. And number five, opportunity to develop value chains. And the last one, six, we speak the same language. And the next one, please. In the other side, Singapore offers to gateway to ASEAN and also to the other markets in Asia. First, participation in multiple regional FTAs, around 26. Second, Singapore has high standards. Number three, good investment environment. Number four, leader in various sectors like financial sector, technology, logistic, and among others. Number four, facilitator construction of GBCs and PA members countries. And the last one is complementary economy to PA members countries. The next one. In conclusions, last but not least, opportunities for the next years in PA, I would like to share some ideas that PA needs to focus in the next 10 years. First, the e-governance. Second, push to the ecosystem of SMEs and entrepreneurship, including the startups, technology companies. Number three, renewable energy. Number four, roadmap of the regional digital market. The goal is to create e-commerce market of around 25 billion in the next years. Number five, improve digital infrastructure. And number six, invest infrastructure program like roads, airport, ports, and train, and among others. The next one is finally, and thank you for your listening.
I would like to thank Mr. Jose Parra, former Vice Minister Sayuri Bayona, and Professor Simon Tay for sharing us your perspective of Pacific Alliance-Asia relations. And now, it's time for our audience to join us in this exciting panel discussion on growing Pacific Alliance-Singapore relations with our 5 distinguished panelists, moderated by international trade economist and assistant professor Sanjana Goswami of Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Thanks.
Thank you for the introduction. I would like to introduce the members of the panel. So we have His Excellency Ignacio Concha, Ambassador of Chile, His Excellency Manuel Solano, Ambassador of Colombia, His Excellency Agustin Garcia Lopez, Ambassador of Mexico, His Excellency Carlos Vasquez, Ambassador of Peru, and we have Dr. Francis Chong, the Senior Director of Emerging Markets Division, Ministry of Trade and Industry of Singapore. Without further ado, let's get into our very interesting panel discussion, and greetings to everyone. So, to our panelists, I would like to ask, so today we have heard very interesting presentations about the origin and the evolution of the Pacific Alliance in its first decade. And we have also heard about Singapore's perspective on Asia and Pacific Alliance relations. For each of you, what is the significance and value of Singapore becoming a new member and the first associate state of this alliance? And what do you think are some of the benefits of this integration for trade, investment, as well as recovery from the economic and social turmoil that the world faces today? So I would like to ask Ambassador Solano to give his perspective.
Thank you, Professor Sanjana. With my colleagues, ambassadors, Dr. Francis, allow me to start to build together the answer for this interesting question that Professor Sanjana is challenging a question. First, to try to to contribute with the answer, let me make some small comments, really small comments. Colombia is the pro tempore presidency since the last December, and we are going to have this honor until this December, when we are going to have the Summit of Presidents in Buenaventura, a beautiful city in the Pacific, in our Pacific coast. For your question, the presidency pro tempore of Colombia, we have a strategic vision for 2030, and for materialize this strategic vision, Colombia made an initiative in 2018 to make a Mar Road, and one part of this Mar Road is to have observators. We promote observators. Not all the ASEAN countries are part of as observators. We need to promote this, but also we create this associate state category, and that is my obvious answer, right? Why this is important? Because Singapore is going to be the first. Of course, how the previous speakers they explained, we have a market of more than 200 million of consumers. We are the 50% or 40% of the trade in Latin America, and also in investment. But to be the first associate country is, let me give you a simple sample. If you arrive to the supermarket, the first person who arrived to the supermarket in the morning, you have the option to obtain the fresh produce. You don't have to make the long line. You can choose. You are the first. You arrive the first. If you arrive to the parking lot, you can have parking in the entrance, close to the store, cover. This is, for me, the simple part of the answer. Singapore have the option to, when this is going to be the first one, to have a strategic part of our vision, 2030. Singapore can be, where are you going to be? In investments, increase the trade, more cooperation. That's my part of my contribution, Ambassador Dr. Francis. I hope you can help me to complete this, the answer for your question.
Okay, thank you. So now we will hear from Ambassador Garcia Lopez.
Muchísimas gracias. First of all, I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to thank, of course, the Vice Minister Valdivieso and the Minister Alvin and everybody here in this wonderful celebration of the 10th anniversary, and in, of course, the entry as the first associate state of Singapore. What is the value and the reason why it's so important for Singapore to be, as Ambassador Solano says, our first in the queue partner? Well, it is important to repeat what has been said here already, which is that the 4 countries 10 years ago, Chile, Peru, Mexico, and Colombia, decided to go beyond customs union. And they decided to be the countries, like-minded, vibrant democracies, dynamic economies that want to make a difference, to be together. And to be together in order to free trade, investment, and to go beyond for real integration, for real political dialogue. So that's the first one. The second one is, well, it's important what you want, but it's important also where you are. And what we saw is that we are on the Pacific Rim, we are on the Latin America Pacific Rim. So of course, our great endeavor is not only to have this internal dynamics with Latin America, with the rest of America, the rest of the world, but in particular with the Pacific. That's what we are not just an alliance, but a Pacific alliance. So that's why in these 2 endeavors, first of all, which is the most dynamic, striving democracy economy here, most open economy, most free economy here in Asia, is precisely Singapore. So the Asia becomes the link. You, Singapore, are the Asian link of the Pacific Alliance. And that's fantastic, because after 10 years, the next 10 years must be more with Asia. Our first partner is Asia. That's an important statement. And the second statement is, of course, that we are striving to do much more than just free trade. And that is why it is important to say that, well, it has taken 4 years, and I congratulate Minister Tan, the negotiators that have done an amazing job, and Peter is there, here with us. So it was really 4 years of doing very harsh negotiations, because it is the first time that as a bloc we negotiate with one country, and that is Singapore. So in that sense, it is not only a free trade agreement, which is, the state-of-the-art free trade agreement, which has everything that a real free trade agreement has to have, in terms of trade, in terms of trade facilitation, in terms of all the legal framework, in terms of all everything that has to do with trade and investment, but also to go beyond. And this trade really goes beyond. It has environment, it has, of course, maritime, which is the first time that I know that Singapore has a maritime component to a trade agreement, which is extremely important for a maritime power, which you are in many sense. So in that endeavor, this is the other part, which is beyond the people's connection, the creation of an environment, of a business environment together, the creation of a like-minded dialogue. And this is the second part. The first part is the free trade agreement with you, and the second part is precisely being the new and the first strategic partner. What is that? We don't know yet. We're going to do it together. So in that sense, just to say what is the relevance and the importance of Singapore. So Singapore is our ancient frontier and our new frontier. Muchas gracias.
Fantastic. That is very, very enlightening. I would now like to invite Ambassador Concha to add to that.
Thank you, Sanjana, for giving me the floor. And of course, my acknowledgements to the organizers of this webinar, and in particular to the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy for hosting us this morning. We have indeed heard interesting comments and presentations regarding the Pacific Alliance and the anniversary, the 10th anniversary of its foundation, and also the value of Singapore being part of the Pacific Alliance in what we call this cross-Pacific relationship. I can't wait for that moment when the negotiations come into fruition, and we'll be witnessing that wonderful moment when the countries sign this document of accession. In my view, I suppose it's going to be a step forward moment in the cross-Pacific relations. Latin American countries in one side, Pacific Alliance, Singapore at the other end, connected by this agreement. But to answer your question, Sanjana, I'd like to focus on what I call the recovery. We have to focus on the economic recovery, thinking on a scenario of a post-pandemic. I think it's important to focus for the good of our citizens and people, focus on how government can take the economy back on track. I think it's important for social peace, social cohesion. We have witnessed in our countries a sort of a social unrest, and I think one of the ways to tackle with this social problem is bringing people more business opportunities, more jobs. So in that regards, I think, and having in mind that the economy is changing so fast from a traditional format into a digital one, of course, this is called the fourth industrial revolution. We have to go digital. If we want to be an inclusive society, we are facing the reduction of a new constitution in my country. So if we want to get that moment of social cohesion, peace, we need more opportunities. And I suppose, in my view, the Pacific Alliance and, of course, these new state members like Singapore, they can contribute to this. Of course, the Pacific Alliance has a digital agenda to help the countries to do the transition from this traditional economy format into a digital market. Digital market is the future. Traditional economy must represent the past. So we had to move to a digital market, and there's three conditions we need to address. It's a digital governance, digital ecosystem, digital market, and digital trade. So that's important to address this moment. And for this, the Pacific Alliance designed a roadmap, how to help the countries to move from the past, the traditional economy, into a digital one. I think we had to keep in that track. And in regard to Singapore, we have to work, if I may say, shoulder to shoulder in helping the start companies working together. The framework, beautiful, wonderful thing, we have signed agreements, documents, but if you want to put meat in this condition of Singapore being member of the Pacific Alliance, we had to put together startup companies, fintech companies. And if we want to do it better, we can do it with the help of some government institution. I'm thinking on Enterprise Singapore, in the case of Singapore, of course, and the case of Chile, Startup Chile, and they've been working together for a while now, so there's a common base, a common ground, in how to do and promote the connections between startups from both countries. I think thinking on digital trade, digital ecosystem, I think we have to push harder for these startup companies working together. And of course, we've been working quite hard in building that house, that common house. The DIPA agreement, which is a digital agreement, promotes digital trade. The imminent laying of a digital cable, which will connect the Pacific Alliance countries and Asia, plus the memorandum of understanding on cybersecurity we are still negotiating with Singapore, is a sort of a framework. It's a robust framework for these companies going to Chile or going to Peru or coming to Singapore, doing business, and of course promoting the work of these startup companies. So as a recap, we had to focus on the economy recovery, how to put the economy back on track, how to move our economies from the old format into new one, which is digital, which is the digital environment, digital trade, digital government. So if we want to prosper in this new world, if we want to save a space for our society to prosper, we need to go digital. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting the importance of digital economy as well. Now I would like to invite Ambassador Vázquez to add his perspective.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Ministers Valdivieso and Alvin for having participating in this webinar, and of course the magnificent presentation of our speakers and the participation of my colleagues. As my colleagues have already said, one of the main objectives of the Pacific Alliance is its projection towards the Asia-Pacific region. And the Pacific Alliance was consistent with this objective in its first decade. The participation of 3 of its members in the CPTPP negotiations and the framework for cooperation between ASEAN and the Pacific Alliance constitute evidence of this commitment. In that context, the agreement with Singapore as a first associated state represents a milestone, a sort of significant building block in that direction, the connective tissue that was mentioned by Minister Tan. That is the first step to reach the goal of having 10 associate states by 2030 in accordance with the 2030 strategic vision of the Alliance. Undoubtedly, this new agreement will reinforce and widen our cooperation links. But in my opinion, its real added value in terms of trade and investment in comparison with the agreements already existent between our countries are the following. Firstly, the rules of origin included in the agreement could contribute to the creation of intra-regional supply chains. The 4 original members of the Alliance need to increase trade among themselves, and supply chains are a tool to achieve that objective, with the purpose of joining global supply chains. In accordance with the 2030 strategic vision, small, and this is very important, small and medium enterprises should join these supply chains in technology-intensive sectors to upgrade the competitiveness of our exports, with the additional benefit of creating jobs, because SMEs are the main employers of all our countries, I suppose. It is okay for our countries to export salmon, coffee, avocados, or minerals to Singapore, but in the world of the 4th Industrial Revolution, our countries should promote a productive transformation which enables them to export knowledge-intensive goods. For example, the Amazon jungle is a huge reservoir of unexplored species with potential healing properties. Between 30 and 40% of biodiversity in the world is in the Amazon jungle. And in the post-pandemic period, this could contribute to boost the health of Latin American and Asian populations. Second, the new agreement includes a chapter on maritime transport services that is an additional element in comparison with similar agreements already in force among our countries. This is a key issue to ensure the sustainability and resilience of cross-regional supply chains. Cooperation on this matter is very important to upgrade, in my opinion, the quality and efficiency of our ports. For example, PSA Marine purchased very recently a Peruvian company that is in charge of towage and pilotage services all along the Peruvian coast. But we also should explore the possibility of increasing our trade with Singapore in other kinds of services. All our countries have developed a valuable expertise in the provision of services such as travel, transport, ships and planes repair, business and digital consulting, engineering and software design. And finally, the agreement includes a chapter on investment that harmonizes standards for the 5 countries. This could propel a new wave of investments where Singapore could play a very important role in terms of financing and technological solutions. One of the crucial sectors to enhance our connectivity is infrastructure. We need new and better ports, airports, roads, railroads, and industrial parks. One of the best examples of this cooperation with Singapore is the Tehuantepec corridor, no? That was, whose master plan has been developed by Surbana Juron. And I am completely convinced that this experience could be useful to implement similar ones in the rest of the region. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Finally, I would like to ask Dr. Chong to give his perspective as well.
Thank you, Sajana. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, friends from all over the world. Thank you for joining us today. It is always a difficult position to go last after all the very thoughtful ideas that ambassadors have put into it. But also very easy because I can just say, I agree with everything that they say. And say that on behalf of my colleagues and others in Singapore, we will certainly work very hard to make this new phase in our relationship an even greater success than it has been for the past 10 years. But nonetheless, as a panelist, I feel obliged that I should add something to it, so I shall attempt. And I think the first part, picking up on what one of my ambassador friends have said, is that we want to build back better after the pandemic, the recovery. And the way to do this, whether for countries or for companies, I believe is to gain greater resilience through diversification. And the Pacific Alliance and Singapore, this relationship we are building, is testimony to that. I did a little bit of research and I discovered that the Antipodes, the exact opposite in geographical terms for Singapore, is in fact a city in Peru, the city of Pantoja in Iquitos and Loretta. So we are connected in ways that we didn't think we were. And not least, hundreds of years ago, our ancestors were already trading through the Manila galleon. And I think that this idea of us being first, perhaps if I may, to modify it a little, we are rediscovering each other. And so instead of just celebrating the first and being first at the table, I think we have a great opportunity to explore, to blaze the trail for others to follow behind us, whether as governments or as companies, to look for new opportunities, and through discovering and seizing these opportunities to be more resilient and to ensure a better future for our people. I wish to make a second point, I think, and picking up on the name of the Pacific Alliance, it conjures up ideas of images of peaceful relationship between peoples. And I think that in the last few years, this idea of peaceful relations between peoples and between countries is ever more important. And so it could not be a more apt partner for Singapore today to have the Pacific Alliance, Alianza del Pacifico. And I think also that it goes beyond just trade. As ambassadors have said, it also speaks to a very human desire to want to explore, to discover, and having made contact, to then engage in trade for mutual benefit in the most specific way. So finally, I want to say that there's an idea of, if we want to go fast, we go in a small group, and today we are a small group. But if we want to go far together and take this opportunity, whether it is what ambassadors have said about new frontiers, we want to bring others along with us. So for Singapore companies going to the Pacific Alliance countries, to then look for opportunities in Latin America, and for Pacific Alliance companies coming to Singapore to look for opportunities in ASEAN and beyond. I think if we can bring others with us, then we will go very far indeed. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So that was very enlightening. Thanks to all of you for responding to that question so wonderfully. Now I would like to take the opportunity to ask each of you some questions as well. So I would like to start with Ambassador Concha, Ambassador of Chile. My question to you is that, so based on our discussion, it seems that we all agree that the value of being part of this successful alliance of countries that promotes investment, business, trade among both sides of the Pacific. Nevertheless, in your own perspective, what aspect would you like to go deeper with Singapore and the ASEAN countries?
Yeah, thank you, Sanjana, for that interesting question. As I proposed in my previous answer to go deeper in digital trade, digital environment, I think it's urgent for humankind going deeper in clean energies. Global warming is a reality. It's here today with us, affecting us. We are now witnessing the result of our lack of care of nature. We've been using fossil fuels for so many years, and considering the global warming and the effects we are witnessing in this moment, we need to change into clean energies. As we need to change into digital, we have to go into clean energies. If we want to save the planet's sustainability for our own survival, clean energies. And for this reason, and having in mind the Paris Agreement 2030, we are pushing very hard on this transition. Fossil fuel into new fuels, renewable fuels. And given the high number of solar plants now up and running in my country, we are betting on green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is basically use electricity, solar panels, which is green, a little bit of water, a chemical process, and then voila, you have a clean green fuel named green hydrogen. And why I raising the topic here? Because we don't want it to do it alone. We want to invite Singapore government, Singapore companies, ASEAN governments, ASEAN companies to go and invest in Chile to produce this new fuel, and then secondly, taking this new fuel into Singapore hub and then spread into other countries. We are doing a bit in order to save the planets, going green. And most importantly, not long ago, we signed a memorandum of understanding on clean energies with Singapore. So within this frame and based on this agreement, we think we can offer something concrete to Singapore companies in doing business and investing in new energies in Chile. And of course, I'd like to invite our guest here to participate in our webinar on clean energies, which is due July 7 next month. We will discuss business opportunities and new chances of going green in Chile. So if someone is interested in linking with this webinar, please call us or write us at the embassy. The email address, the link for the seminar is too complicated. You know, it's numbers and letters and hashes. So my address email address at the embassy is P for Portugal, A for Algiers, .embassyofchile.org .st. Simple. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I would like to pose a question to Ambassador of Colombia, Ambassador Solano. What cooperation projects should be conducted with Singapore within the framework of the Pacific Alliance, according to you?
Thank you for your second question addressed to me. Cooperation, my colleague Ambassador Concha mentioned two really important aspects. One is that the preservation and respect of the environment. Another is clean energy. This is one of the aspects. We have a long menu that in subjects and topics that Singapore can work. But previous year, the Minister Alvin participated in the forum is organized by Chile, a cooperation forum. So, but now, how it's going to be associated state soon, maybe in hours or days or maximum weeks, it's important, Dr. Francis, in the frame that the Singapore want to choose, in the frame with the embassies here, you have to choose one project to present in October, and in October you are going to be associate member, according to our wish. So, but if I have to choose one of the projects, Ambassador Concha also mentions, for me, I think our agencies, ProColombia, Enterprise Singapore, all the agencies of the countries of the Pacific Alliance, have to promote the SMEs, the small medium companies. But in special for the capacities of Singapore, have to be the startups. Why? The startups need financial support, something that we can get, I think, more or less efficient and easy is financial support from Singapore. One of these companies, small companies that we call now startups, go to Mexico, they establish there. It's easy for them go to expand the operation to another country because we have a block with full integration. They don't have to do any extra effort. It's easy for them to move. They don't have to go to understand what is the economy because it's exactly the same how we can operate in Santiago, in Lima, in Mexico, and after, but we need a special project from Singapore, it's my recommendation, that you can present. Also, you can do it in the frame of ASEAN or with us. And my recommendation is in startups with financial support to go to this extraordinary market, consolidated market, integrated food market that we know, Alianza del Pacífico. That is my answer for your question.
Okay, so startups it is. My next question is to the Ambassador of Mexico, Ambassador Garcia Lopez. So the world has been facing pressures of protectionism, anti-globalization sentiments, and the devastating COVID-19 pandemic. And given the recent celebrations of the 10th anniversary of the 4-member Pacific Alliance, with 59 observer countries, and with Singapore becoming its first associate state, why is it important to reaffirm open trade, investment, and rules-based globalization through multilateral mechanisms such as Pacific Alliance?
Thank you very much, Professor. Yes, of course, it is important to say not only that Singapore is the Asian frontier and the new frontier, but also that we have been working with Singapore for a very long time, that the ties with Latin America and the Pacific Alliance and Singapore are old ties, and they have been reinforcing enormously. It's important to mention that in 2019, in November, the last visit that we received, the government visit that we received in Mexico, and the last visit that your Prime Minister did, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, was precisely to my President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, in Mexico for a 4-day visit. He was in the Senate, he was, of course, with the city mayor, with the President himself, in an amazing collaboration and agreements that now we're trying, of course, to land. But he came to Mexico not only because of Mexico, because it was a statement that Singapore wanted to reaffirm the links with Latin America. And it is important to say that we are all members of PEC. Most of the countries here are members of APEC as well as Singapore. We have been also, as you have said, Ambassador, we have been also not only negotiating, the most sophisticated agreement, which is difficult to pronounce because there's too many letters, CTPPP, and that is agreement, as Professor Tai tells us, an agreement that is so important to precisely do the link between the American rim of the Pacific and the Asian countries. So that's a very important basis that we already have. At the same time, we know that Mexico and Singapore, instead of just going and closing themselves, because now we have, I think we have a tremendous change of paradigm. It is not only, the terrible pandemic that we have with COVID-19, and that has shown us that we are the same. It is amazing to see that in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, everywhere in the world, we're suffering the same problems, the same challenges. We have to do the same things to be secure, to have, a healthy life, to be able to have everything that we need in terms of pandemics, food security, water, health, the proper health system, the vaccines, the medicines, also the civil society, to be able to tell to people, hey, stay home, put your mask. So all these things are things that approach us to say, in difficult, in crisis matters, we have to realize that we have to do our work in our home, in our country, but together, because we are global, because it is only, as Ambassador of Colombia says, cooperation that will give us really the response on what the new paradigm will be. And I think that in that sense, Singapore is, of course, a new frontier, because we are doing wonderful work in terms of the new economy, in terms of the green solution, in terms of the technology, in terms of the best practices in public policy that we have talked about. But, as Dr. Chongsak has said, you are our hub, not only, of course, to Singapore, but to Asia Pacific. Of course, to ASEAN, but to the rest of Asia. And the fact that you are not only in these all agreements, but you have done like Mexico and the countries here, that instead of just staying put, you have been having an agreement with the European Union. So Mexico has done that. You have done with the Brexit country, with UK, and today I think that you are starting negotiations of an agreement like the one that you have with Chile, with the new economy, with Britain as well. The thing that you're doing is also, to go further, and now with the RCEP, which it was as Professor Tai says, it was an ASEAN sort of agreement that, of course, gathered Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, of course, Northern Asia as well. So that's the opportunity of Asia Pacific also to go there and to link, as you say, with the productive change. And it's a new way of doing productive change. We have to approach, Asia has to approach America, and America has to approach Asia. So we're going to profit of your links with the RCEP, but you have also to profit with the links that we have. Our countries have a lot of free trade agreements, and in the case of Mexico, of course, we have the new NAFTA, the agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico, that also gives these enormous opportunities to have these synergies, this investment, these new change, these new ways of looking at the challenge of climate change, the challenge of technology, and the challenge of the shifting geopolitics. And this is an opportunity to have what we had in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, which was a new paradigm with all the discoveries of the America, the new trade routes, that we discovered new markets. We discovered globalization through the Pacific with the Manila Acapulco galleon, as your minister says. Let's have this opportunity, as you say, to have this new paradigm together. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador. So now we have heard about various different issues. I would like to raise a different one. So food security is one of the most important challenges faced by the international community and aggravated by the effects of the current pandemic and the disruption of supply chains. In your opinion, Ambassador Vázquez, Ambassador of Peru, to what extent the impending agreement between Singapore and Pacific Alliance, as well as the future collaboration as associate states, could contribute to strengthen the food security of our countries?
Okay, thank you for this second question. Latin America is a region with an abundance of land and water. But I have to refer to some statistics. It could be a little bit boring, but we need to refer to some statistics to understand that position of Latin America in the world. According to the OECD FAO Agricultural Outlook for 2020-2029, the region represents 13% of world production of agricultural and fisheries commodities and 25% of their exports. It is considered that Latin America could be the source of almost 28% of food exports in the world by 2029. And the demand of these products will double in Asia by that year. Likewise, the FAO estimates that in Latin America there is a potential and use suitable land for agricultural purposes of more than 200,000 hectares. These data demonstrate a high potential of our region to become one of the most important granaries of the world in the next decade. Taking into account this information, I would like to refer to three particular aspects in which our future collaboration as associated states could contribute to strengthen food security. First, superfoods. Latin America is a source of highly nutritious food. In a post-pandemic period and in a context of accelerating aging of population in some Asia-Pacific countries, the need to shore up healthy lifestyles, as the ambassador of Mexico mentioned, will become one of the main concerns and priorities of our governments and societies. So, avocados and cocoa from Mexico. No, I don't know, Andean grains and fruits such as quinoa, kiwicha, or golden berries from Colombia and Peru, and blueberries from Chile and Peru, could significantly contribute to healthier and longer lives for the Singaporean and Southeast Asian populations. It is relevant to mention, too, that other candidates to become associate states of the Pacific Alliance, such as Australia and New Zealand, are also exporters, very important exporters of food, and it could be possible to think about the creation in the perspective of medium and long terms of a sort of food security ecosystem with the participation of Pacific Alliance associated states. The second issue is supply chains. I always talking about supply chains. I already referred to the importance of this issue in my first intervention. But this is a crucial issue to ensure the safe and timely arrival of food products to Asian destinations, crossing the whole Pacific Ocean. So we could create new supply chains through efficient ports and perhaps some direct maritime routes between our countries and Singapore by improving load consolidation and refrigeration system, for example, assisted by cutting-edge digital systems. This could reduce costs and improve possibilities of Singapore as a destination market and logistics hub for Pacific Alliance products. And finally, food innovation. Singapore intends to promote food innovation. It is creating a whole ecosystem for innovative technologies in food industry, associating institutions such as A-Star, Agri-Food Innovation Park, and Food Innovation Center, among others. This is a great opportunity for Pacific Alliance startup enterprises to foster new highly nutritious and knowledge-based products. For instance, there is a Peruvian company which created an energetic bar. Its name is Demolitor, that was awarded in 2019 by Up Nutrition Award in Greece and recommended by FAO. Another Peruvian enterprise created a nutritional cookie, Nutri Hierro, to combat anemia and won a contest promoted by History Channel. So I am convinced that we can find a lot of these examples in our countries, No? And food innovation could be another strategic goal of the Associated States of the Pacific Alliance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. So now that we have heard from all of the ambassadors, I would like to ask Dr. Francis Chong, what is your perspective? How can Singapore benefit, and what can Singapore offer to this relationship?
I think that the ambassadors have touched on many of the benefits to both sides. Right? Trade is wonderful in creating mutual benefit. It is indeed a win-win. So, in fact, at the start of the pandemic, and it may not be so widely known, we already benefited through the active help of the ambassadors to release medical supplies that we urgently needed in Singapore, for which we were very grateful, and still are very grateful. And you know, what goes around also comes around, and in our turn, now that we have the situation under better control in Singapore, we are also glad to be able to render some assistance through the supply of medical equipment that the public would need. So to me, maybe I'll pick up on a theme about maybe projects, right? To get to know each other better, the signing of the agreements, becoming a associate member state, it's just the beginning. By working together on specific projects, I think we get to understand each other better. Because in the end, whatever systems and processes we put in place, nothing substitutes for people getting to know one another and learning the ways of working and working together for mutual benefit. In this regard, I cannot agree more that we need to pay attention to the needs of our SMEs. And if I may connect it to something that's already been said about food security. In fact, food security, as ambassadors have said, is a chain, right? We need the demand side, and new demand creates security and resilience for the producers, who are then better able to provide the same security that the consumers will need, especially in a crisis where normal chains are broken, and we need new ones, or to enhance new ones. So, but for SMEs, it's often difficult to cross vast distances. So I'll connect to something that ambassadors have said. We need to take full advantage of digitalization, whether it's using e-commerce platforms and helping to connect SMEs in our respective countries with new markets, so that they are able to grow beyond their domestic market. Right. This is something which Singapore has been doing a lot, and we'll be happy to share the experience with Pacific Alliance friends. So, but finally, I'll come around to a point, Sanjana, that while a lot of attention has been paid to digitalization and virtual, and in a way the pandemic has required us to behave in this way, but we are still, at the end of the day, we are human beings. We like to get together. And when people get together, it is very normal that exchange will happen. Exchange of ideas, exchange of goods, exchange of services. That's when trade happens. So even as we look forward to a world where digital is the future, I think we should also not give up on certain advantages that are there, opportunities that are there for the seizing, to build more traditional ways of connecting. And what I had in mind was, how do people get together? Well, you know, although it may be a bit challenging for environmental friendliness, we fly. And the pandemic has also broken many of the air connections between countries. As we build back, how do we take advantage of developments such as the Open Skies Agreement between EU and Singapore and ASEAN, right, of which Singapore is a part, and existing Open Skies Agreement that Colombia and Mexico has with Singapore? How do we use these structures and these agreements in place to enable our people to get together more easily? And when people get together, then they exchange ideas, they trade, and we build a better future together.
Thank you, Dr. Chong. So those were my questions to the panelists. And now we will move on to some question and answers session. There were a number of questions actually sent by the audience. We won't have time to go through all of them. So I would just like to start with this question. It's by Eduardo Lageotero, who wants to know that in addition to trade and investment, could you talk about how the Pacific Alliance can benefit the education and cultural sectors in all these countries involved? For example, are there any initiatives that could entice Singaporeans to learn more about the Latin American culture, visit the region, and so on? So the floor is open. If any of the ambassadors or Dr. Chong, you want to respond to that question, please go ahead. Okay, Ambassador Mexico, yes.
Of course, the great thing about this trade, and as it said here, is not only about investment and trade, but as Dr. Chong says, it's people to people. And here the good thing about this agreement is that we have, as it had been said, a social chapter. We have a chapter on gender, which is so important. But of course, for example, the maritime services. Maritime services is not only the service of maritime itself, but for example, it has provisions to have all these programs, these education programs about our maritime, services and industries between our countries, and even to have in the vessels internships, so that you can learn how to do this very complex, that has become a very complex trade, which is the merchant maritime trade. And the same thing, of course, the fact that we are here means that we did not choose, to have our first seminar in an economic institution or in a business association. Well, we chose it to have it precisely here in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, because this is crucial. The first thing for us is that our societies know what we are doing, what is the Asia Pacific all about. And in that sense, I think, well, I was ambassador to the OECD, and I know that Singapore has had always, the best grades in terms of how you do education and the quality of your education. So in that sense, I think it will be crucial to increase our programs of students and researchers coming to your universities. Ours, of course, coming to our continent. Now, of course, presential will be the best, but we can use these kind of tools to be able to reach much more people. And I think that there are wonderful best practices of Singapore to be taught to our countries, but also from our countries to Singapore. And what we have said, we have already a fantastic history in the 16th century. So, of course, the trade patterns that you have here and the gastronomic patterns that you have here and that we have there is because of this wonderful cultural exchange. There was an amazing cultural, for example, art, religious art being done, China, furniture, fantastic things that were part of this fruition of exchange. In 2023, we will have in the Asia Civilization Museum a great exhibition precisely on the Manila Acapulco galleon and everything that entailed. All the patterns of consumption are different. Here you have chiles that you didn't have before. The kind of spice that you have in the curries and so on comes from the Mexican chiles. The potatoes comes, of course, from Peru. The papayas come from Colombia and Mexico, and so forth. So even the patterns of how we live and what we do have been really changed because of this cultural exchange. So one of the things that we have to do is precisely to increase these education exchanges and, of course, to know the very rich culture of this part of Asia and of our part of the Americas.
Thank you. And Dr. Chong, you wanted to add something?
Well, maybe from the Singapore side, I would say that Eduardo asked a very good question. And education, we learn from each other. It works in two ways. And I remember that a few years ago, and unfortunately, as the pandemic put a stop to it, Tech Monterey students came to Singapore as a result of the facilitation of the embassy. And this kind of exchanges, especially among young people, would help to achieve what Eduardo would like to see, which is more educational exchanges. I want to also say that to access a culture, it is so important to be able to learn the language. And actually, for some years now, the Ministry of Education has offered Spanish as a third language for our students. So many of our students are taking. I wish more would do so. I encourage more to do so if you're listening in. And my dream is that, ambassadors, at the 20th anniversary, we will have another set of seminars in the Pacific Alliance in Spanish.
Muy bien, me parece.
I would like to make some very brief comments. There are some tools that have already been developed by the Pacific Alliance in terms of cultural education. There is a platform for students and scholars mobility that has already been in place for a very long time, I think. And the Pacific Alliance has given some scholarships, more than 1,000 or something like that, to students of the country members of the Pacific Alliance. And there is also a program, a cultural program related to tourism, that has been developed by the Pacific Alliance. So there is an agenda that goes much beyond only the trade and investment agenda that's really very interesting and could be taken into account by Singapore. Once Singapore becomes very soon the first associated state of the Pacific Alliance.
I think all our listeners would be very happy to hear all of these initiatives. So we are soon going to run out of time, so I will pose one last question. Okay. So this question pertains to trade costs. It's very important to lower trade costs, not just transport, information, etc., to improve connectivity and have denser links. So can the panelists respond to how the Pacific Alliance can work with its Asian partners to improve the logistics and the supply chain links, global value chains? Are there any specific sectors that we should invest in to further increase the bilateral trade and investment flows? And this question is by Nadia Hernandez and Evelyn Devadasan.
Well, supply chain, as long as we develop more business, we enhance the core of our business between Latin American countries, in particular Pacific Alliance countries, and of course ASEAN, because target for PA countries is not only Singapore, but ASEAN countries in a second stage. So we need to move these products. But we had to work on that, and it is my understanding that Mexico has a long experience in this supply chain. And we've been working on that in terms of moving fruit products from my country to, it used to be initially Singapore, and because of the size of the market, we switched it off to China. China attracts too many things from our countries. So when it comes to export fruit, the problem is the size of the market. China is too big.
Yes.
That is the problem. And everything aside China is difficult to get.
Reasonable.
And I think once Singapore be part of us, we have to work more on the supply chain to take advantage of the benefits of Singapore ports in terms of going ASEAN countries. Say, well, Indonesia is a big market. We are talking about 200 million people. At some extent, Vietnam is also an interesting country for us to trade. Don't forget that Vietnam 10 or 20 years ago was a poor country, just coming out of a devastating war, and now it's a booming economy. So don't forget that the ultimate target, it is not only connecting Pacific Alliance countries and Singapore via this document, but also going other places. Of course, the reversal of this is the Latin American countries for Singapore and ASEAN countries. So the challenge is how we put more beef on this skeleton we are now building in. Thank you.
Indeed.
And any last thoughts from any of the panelists?
Well, maybe on those issues of connectivity, now it is very difficult, very different to think about connectivity. Of course, the maritime trade is crucial, but we have seen that with the Suez Canal and everything that happened, no, that we cannot only rely on that. But of course, it will be good for Asia Pacific and Singapore to see how we can have better connectivity, not only maritime, but of course air connectivity. We're speaking with Singapore Airlines and our airlines to think out of the box and to see how can we really have, you know, this connection, because as you say, it's amazing. We are so close and we are so far away because we are antipodes. So if you put a hole here, then you come to one of the countries. It depends how you deviate. You come directly to Iquitos, Peru, or if you go a little bit to the south, you go to Chile. A little bit to the north, you go to Colombia, and you really incline it, then you go to Mexico. So it's amazing how we are antipodes. So in that sense, it is the connectivity, you know, which is by of course maritime and air, which is so important. But there are other kinds of connectivities. Now, of course, with the digital economy, this is we can travel there in a couple of instants, and this is the kind of things that we have to do, and we're doing it. For example, with fintech projects, we have now with a startup. Mexico had with a startup of Singapore. They chose Singapore to be the partner to trade bonds through your mobile, and they could choose any company in America, in Europe, or whatever, but they chose Singapore and Mexico. So this connectivity was done because of these kinds of investments. And the same thing what we have called about the value chains. The way we thought about value chains also is changing. We have to do our investments of Singapore investments in Asia Pacific countries and Asia Pacific countries here, so that we are closer together, so that we can share ourselves, you know, to be part of the kind of value chains here in Asia, and for you to be part of the value chains of Asia Pacific, Latin America, and of North America. And this is another kind of connectivity which is for us, you know, to explore. And as you say, we're in an adventure together. Let's have this adventure and let's be successful in it for all of course, our communities and our people.
And now I must respond very quickly to such an inspiring call by the Ambassador of Mexico. I say, you know, my answer to Nadia is that governments can only do so much. Regulatory harmonization, facilitation, but nothing drives down the cost of trade as much as the growth in volume. And for that, we need businesses and we need people. And there are already many, not as many as we would like, who have already started exploring our respective markets and its environment and surroundings. So for those businesses who are listening in, I urge you, right, start today. In fact, start yesterday, right? And the ambassadors are here to help you. And for Singapore companies going out there, Enterprise Singapore has its presence in the market as well. And that will really help to grow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we have run out of time. I wish we could go on because there are so many questions. So with this, we conclude our panel. I would really like to thank all of our distinguished speakers, the ambassadors of Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, and Dr. Francis Chong from MTI. Thank you so much. It was an honor and privilege to have you here at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
It was an honor for us.
Maravillosa moderadora, profesora.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, distinguished panelists, for the engaging and insightful dialogue. And next, joining us is Mr. Eduardo Pedrosa, Secretary General of the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, PEC, to share on Pacific Alliance and Singapore Free Trade Agreement and Associated States, a new chapter in the Asia Pacific. Mr. Pedrosa, please.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, good evening. Thank you very much for having me here today. Ms. Laura Valdivieso Jiménez, Vice Minister of Trade of Colombia, Mr. Alvin, Minister of State, Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, friends. It's my great pleasure to speak on this topic for three distinct reasons. This is, of course, the 10th anniversary of the Pacific Alliance. I believe this marks a milestone in the evolution of Asia-Pacific cooperation, and this year also marks the 500th anniversary of the first recorded crossing of the Pacific by Magallanes and his crew. But this comes at a critical time in the evolution of the international trade system. The WTO is in a period of change with a new Director General in place. There are several plurilateral negotiations ongoing, and there's a need to resolve long-standing concerns over the dispute settlement system. While the WTO expects world merchandise trade to recover this year and grow by 8% after the drop of 5.3% last year, there are risks to this outlook, most of which are related to the ongoing pandemic. As part of our work at the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, we conduct a survey on the economic policy issues facing our region. Last year, 63% of respondents cited the health pandemic as a top risk to growth for their economy. However, 51% also cited protectionism as a top risk. This is a substantial increase from just 22% 10 years ago. So this initiative comes at a timely moment and underscores the importance of working together with like-minded partners and the need to explain the benefits of trade and integration to our respective communities. In the relatively short time that the Pacific Alliance has been in existence, its progress has been superb. And I believe this has come through a commitment to openness and integration. Its members are putting into practice the many principles they've been learning in Asia-Pacific cooperation, including open regionalism. Now, though, more than just having observers, the Pacific Alliance is in a process of signing agreements with associate members. From its very inception in Lima 10 years ago, the Pacific Alliance was intended to serve as a mechanism for dialogue and integration with the Asia-Pacific. And this has been achieved through having observers with the region, but also, since 2014, the Pacific Alliance has been having ministerial meetings with ASEAN members at the ministerial level. An ASEAN-Pacific Alliance framework for cooperation has been in place since 2016, but now a new chapter is dawning for the Pacific Alliance members' relations with the Asia-Pacific, with the substantial completion of PASFTA. And similar agreements are now being negotiated with Canada, Australia, and New Zealand as well. Now, I said at the outset there are concerns about protectionism, but in this region that has been a substantial beneficiary of the multilateral trading system, there is forward momentum. Last year in East Asia, ASEAN and its partners signed the world's largest free trade agreement, the RCEP. It joins the CPTPP as another potential pathway to an eventual free trade area of the Asia-Pacific. And one question is, what role will there be for the Pacific Alliance in the regional trade architecture? And I believe one thing that it does is to prevent a line from being drawn down the middle of the Asia-Pacific. One challenge moving ahead is to build awareness of the Pacific Alliance beyond those who specialize in Latin America and regional development. To give you a sense of the challenge, even amongst those who follow Asia-Pacific issues, 23% of the regional policy community said that they don't know what the economic impact of the Pacific Alliance would be on their economies. And that rises to 31% amongst the Southeast Asian policy experts. I said earlier that we not only need to keep up momentum on trade initiatives, but also explain the benefits to our communities. This event comes during another anniversary. It was 500 years ago that the first recorded crossing of the Pacific Ocean took place. And this gave rise to an immense era of trade and commerce, another era of globalization. So a few years ago, I had actually asked a public relations guru how to explain trade and globalization to a more general audience. The advice was to appeal to people what are actually passionate about. I had a look at the Facebook post about the substantial completion of the Pacific Alliance Singapore Free Trade Agreement. And it was interesting to note that amongst the 300 comments on the post, there were three trends. There were the general comments, comments about football, and comments about food. And it's hard, if not impossible, to imagine what Southeast Asian food would be like without South America's influence. Can you imagine what our food would be like without South American chilies? From a more selfish point of view, I find it hard, if not difficult, to imagine my life without chocolate. Today, Southeast Asia is the world's biggest exporter of rubber. But of course, rubber is also indigenous to South America. My children know that French fries don't really come from France, but I'm not 100% sure that they know that potatoes are indigenous to Peru. So let me conclude by looking forward and asking us to imagine what the future might bring, what new goods and services deeper trade with the Pacific Alliance will bring. I believe the answers are with our entrepreneurs working on cutting-edge issues to resolve today's problems, dealing with the pandemic, the SMEs leveraging the potential of the digital economy, the new opportunities in services, dealing with climate change, the creative economy, and many more. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes of this initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Pedrosa, for excellent remarks. We are arriving to the end of our session, and we would like to invite His Excellency Manuel Solano, Ambassador of Colombia in Singapore, and Mr. Peter Govindasamy, Dean of the MTI Academy and Chief Negotiator of the Pacific Alliance Singapore Free Trade Agreement, from the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Singapore, to give the closing remarks. Your Excellency and Mr. Govindasamy, please.
Dear friend, amigo, Peter, we almost made the job of this wonderful morning to promote the Pacific Alliance and our new associated state. There is many conclusions that maybe we have to do about the supply chains, food security, clean energy, many aspects. But I think the first conclusion is because of the great champion that Singapore gave to us, Peter, as a chief negotiator of Singapore, and the work was about negotiator in Colombia, with Felipe Quintero and the rest of the group. We are ours to have our first cooperation frame. This is the standard to be associated state. So we are going to have this frame of cooperation in trade and investments because of you, all of your job. But, amigo, I don't know if our audience, maybe 2 hours, almost 3 hours, I don't know exactly how long we want to spend. But if you don't mind, as I think you are among of the Singaporeans who knows much better, not only because of the negotiation, because you went to all of our countries, you have connection with our people. You know how to work with Colombians, Mexicans, Chileans, Peruvians at the same time. I think more than the Kumeya conclusions, one of the great conclusion is great benefits is during the Colombian presidency pro tempore, we are going to get the first FTA, as the Minister Alvin mentioned. That give you another additional 50 million of possibilities of business, of contact. I know the digital is good, but also through the connectivity is important, this connection, that you have this experience. I think it's good for all of our audience if you can speak about your experience of maybe 4 years, 5 years working with us. My friend Pedro, cuéntanos, ¿cómo fue tu experiencia en Latinoamérica con la Alianza del Pacífico?
Thank you, Ambassador Solano. Let me first join my minister in congratulating the Pacific Alliance on your 10th anniversary. Let me now share 4 concluding reflections as a response to your question. First, having worked with the Pacific Alliance for many years, not only as a chief negotiator, prior to that, I spent many years in Geneva, in our embassy to the WTO. I've worked very closely with Pacific Alliance counterparts. So based on all this experience, which goes to more than 20 years, I can confidently say that the Pacific Alliance and Singapore are kindred spirits. We are like-minded partners committed to keeping our economies open, and we did so even during the pandemic. we are supporters of the rules-based trading system. So in my 4 years as the chief negotiator, one of the consistent themes, the spirit, the vision that my Pacific Alliance chief negotiator counterparts, in fact all negotiators have, is that common vision that we are here to promote globalization, we are here to integrate, that we are here to grow our trade, here to ensure that we have a robust trading system, that the FTA that we have been doing will support the multilateral rules-based system. So that's my first reflection. The Pacific Alliance and Singapore are kindred spirits. So that leads to my second reflection. Our relationship with the Pacific Alliance, as my minister also highlighted, is long-standing. Our relationship with the Pacific Alliance is broad, it is deep. The FTA builds on this foundation. The FTA is also our first FTA ambassador with Colombia, and we are very happy with that. The FTA will catalyze greater trade and investment between our countries. Additionally, as my minister highlighted very clearly, the FTA sends a powerful message that our countries remain open for business and we want to create more opportunities for people. That brings me to my next point, the other reflection which all of us have mentioned through the course of this morning. A third pillar in our solid relationship is our associate membership of the Pacific Alliance. This provides an additional platform to collaborate in areas that goes beyond the FTA, in areas like trade facilitation, water and port management, logistics, digital economy, energy, and food trade. So we look forward to working with you, Ambassador, and with my other Ambassador colleagues and Pacific Alliance counterparts to realize the mutual benefit from the associate membership. So let me now go to my final reflection point. It is fitting that today's seminar is entitled Pacific Alliance and Singapore, we are partners in globalization. In this regard, I am reminded of a Spanish proverb which I highlighted in the first round in Cali when I make my opening remarks. So the Spanish proverb goes something like this. It says, "Traveler, there are no roads, roads are made by walking."
Yes.
So
right?
we have made the FTA road by collaboratively walking together with our Pacific Alliance friends over the past 4 years. We look forward to making the associate membership highway. So we have made the road, which is the FTA. We see the associate membership as the highway. So, and we have the vision that the FTA and the associate membership will serve as expressways to help us to go faster and further with the Pacific Alliance. On a personal note, Ambassador, I started the FTA process in September 27 as Peter, my name. I am completing the process with the Pacific link, which is Pedro. So today I declare that I am Pedro. Thank you very much.
Okay, my friend Pedro, I think we are out of the time, but allow me to make my job part of our duties as a pro tempore presidency. Our next step, because we are going clear, partners in globalization, but I hope for the next August 12th, you take advantage of your position, but I hope for that moment you are going to be associated state, full associated state of the Pacific Alliance, de la Alianza del Pacífico. So in August 12th, we are going to have the 9th Business Matchmaking Forum about agro-industries with all of our agencies for our countries. We prepare this, and I hope it's B2B meetings that you can have all the options for our products and opportunities in our agro-industry. I hope Singapore is going to be part as an associate and global partner of the Pacific Alliance.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Okay.
We have now come to the end of this seminar, and we hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you once again in the name of the Pacific Alliance countries and our host at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and the MTI Academy, for taking the time to joining us today. Goodbye, hasta pronto.